Hi, everyone. As Ola just said, we're going to talk about video content and how video content is shaping digital storytelling today. You probably all know it. You log onto your Facebook, you scroll, you see some videos, you maybe click and watch a few seconds, then you get bored. You probably don't even take care, don't even look at most of them because it just doesn't interest you. So. Still, like publishers, for publishers, it's really important to create video content next to text and images. And so, but Facebook published a study where they found out that the attention span on someone on Facebook is literally 8.25 seconds, and 19% of online viewers lose interest when watching a video after the first 10 seconds. So that's like a really, really short amount of time as a publisher or a brand to get your message across. So the question is, like, how do you create some videos that grab someone's attention, that are there to get people like really interested. To discuss this further, I'm happy to introduce three amazing women on the stage right now who are all experts in this field. So welcome Eloise King, Vice UK Digital Programming Executive and ID Global Executive Producer. Franziska Müller von der Ade, she's the founder of the content creating agency Glutamat, and Sylvie Weber, who's a freelance filmmaker. Welcome. So as we don't have that much time, let's get right into it. Eloise, so Vice is one of the biggest publishing houses these days. We produce a lot of video content every day, every second. And I was wondering how do publishers like Vice or ID work with video? What's the importance of videos these days?
So I think one of the really important things to recognize about Vice is that Vice has always been a digital-first platform. And so in lots of ways, the inheritance of that for a brand like ID, when they were bought a couple of, 3 years ago now, was a really rich one because it was already in dialogue with the global community. And so content has always been something that we've recognized there is an appetite for. And really what's happened in the past 2 years is that we've just looked at all of the different mediums. So whether or not it's been going back to linear by creating a TV channel, whether or not it's been like looking at socials, whether or not it's been looking at platforms like Snapchat, it's looking at how you can create content and bring things to the screens of the audiences and feed that demand that we know is there.
But how, what does a Vice-produced video, what makes a Vice-produced video? What makes it relevant? What is the key points that you do when you develop a story?
So I think what we're always looking for is to inform the audience as to something they don't know about. I think for ID, we're always looking to be the voice of a generation. So at the moment, when we're talking about fashion, we're not talking about fashion in a traditional sense of product. What we're talking about is creativity, identity, culture, politics, and social issues and how those mesh. And once the ideas are sort of have a story that can travel, I think that's something that's really exciting for me.
And when you work with video, what are the biggest rewards you're getting out of it? So what is what kind of feedback do you get, and what are also maybe the challenges you're facing?
So video at its very best is something that really delivers incredible visual creativity, but also informs us to a story. It platforms talent, which is a huge thing that we do both in terms of Vice and ID. And also what it enables you to do really is to make the world feel like it's accessible, and it makes all of those different sort of aspects of fashion feel much more accessible and aspirational. The challenges of that, of course, is there is a huge saturation in terms of content that's being made. When Vice came about in its sort of nascent stage, it was one of very, very few platforms that were doing that. Increasingly, when you look at things like Lad Bible, or even as Vogue is increasingly evolving into making narrative storytelling around fashion like we've done, the challenge is to sort of stay one step ahead, but stay relevant, but also stay interesting and true to the tone of voice that we have.
And when I just said before that the attention span of people is going back, how do you deal with that as a video producing company?
I think there are kind of a lot of myths about attention spans. Like, we've made films that are 40 minutes long online, which is an absolute no-no, and, you know, we've had millions of views on them. And
What
so
platform was that under?
And so even, I guess, looking at Grace Neutral, that was one of our most successful series. That's a really good example of the way that things have moved across sort of platforms. So Grace Neutral was something we developed for ID, which was initially an article, so that was publishing an editorial. Then we made a short video for ID Meets. It then became a series that had, I think, now around 6 million views, and that's across 4 different films that we broke down. And then we reversioned it all over again and put it out onto television. And globally, that's the most successful program that's ever been made across the Viceland network.
And on ID, we also work a lot with brands. So like branded video is a big part of what we do. And Franziska, so you worked on the editorial side before and now moved over to running a content agency working with brands like Nike. So it seems like millennials these days, they don't seem to mind content that is branded that much anymore, as long as it's well made and it resonates with their worldview. So if you're able to fuse what a brand wants together with what your audience reacts to, you can create content that is actually really great. So from your perspective, what kind of insight do you have to that?
I think that it's always a little bit difficult to put a whole generation into a special target group, but all the people grew up in the mid-90s or later are just very used to the internet as a channel and for entertainment and information, and also the many voices, much more voices than we had before when there were some media houses. And I think it's completely natural for this audience that also brands are authors or sources of entertainment and information in a certain way. So, but this doesn't necessarily mean that the audience is not critical. And this is why it needs to have, the content provided by brands need to have a certain quality, of course.
So what makes a good branded video?
I would be pretty bored if there would be this one size-fits-all magical recipe for branded content. But I think one thing that makes storytelling different from advertising is that you take your audience and also your protagonists very seriously and try not to educate or persuade, but listen to the stories of the people and listen also to the reactions.
And what is like an insight maybe you can share from Vice on the aspect of branded video?
Yeah, I'd say for us one of the best examples was the relationship that we fostered with Chanel for ID, and that's across the Vice network. So I think the integrity of that really spoke for itself. We worked with sort of a huge number of really incredibly talented women. So the campaign was essentially looking at the female gaze, which I guess sort of a year, 6 months ago was like a really important sort of, not just as a zeitgeist, but a cultural movement that we see happening across the industry. So what we did is we took a number of women, including Ez Devlin, Harley Weir, and we met Alma Harrell, and made films with them, about them, and then pieces of work, and sort of created something around that. So there was kind of like a 3-stage process. But I think the strength of that was that they reflected the values that we have as a brand. They were really interested in platforming exciting talent from around the world. They have a talent that we wanted to share and that we wanted to, in some ways, like sort of, I guess, break down the process of, which our audience is always really interested in. When I talked about aspiration, one of the ways that you can make things really aspirational is by demystifying it and bringing the audience closer to it. And so in terms of Chanel, it was really about taking this huge, like, you know, heritage brand who'd never done anything digital before, which required a huge amount of trust. And we were able to sort of foster a relationship in which we were presenting something that was both incredibly exciting, but for us, importantly, like, had a meaning. The social issue behind it was one that we really got behind.
And Sylvie, so you worked as a freelance video maker for a long time, and we worked together on ID pieces before. How do you see the shift in working with publishers and brands, since the focus is like so much on video? Is there like a shift when they approach you? Is there something that changed?
Yeah, I think definitely there's a demand for like more authentic, culturally relevant storytelling, and
What do you mean when you say that?
I feel that like the people want to relate to stories and that they can identify with. So like whenever I try to create a story, it's more about the questions I ask to myself, like what's relevant for me, what do I see out there, what's going wrong, what's our social political sphere that we're in right now, and then coming from that standing point, in best case scenarios, I try to try to tie in the brand and the message of the brand. So I think, yeah, the own experiences are becoming more and more important in that sense.
What are like the what are like the biggest challenges when you work in a collaborative way with a publishing house or a brand compared to your personal work?
I think definitely to bring those two messages together, or to the two voices, the voice of the brand and the voice of the filmmaker, and to find a common ground. But yeah, amazingly it works better and better. So because I feel that that consumers as well as brands know that you can't just serve us like cinematic fast food in a way. So yeah.
On the one hand, you said that it just said fast food, but on the other hand, Vice is producing clips for Facebook now, so everything's getting shorter and shorter. Is there something that you, when you do films, take in consideration? Is that something that you think about in the process already, that you produce like snippets for like different platforms, or how does the process work for all of you? Is that?
Yeah, definitely. And I think what you said was so important, like authenticity. So whether or not a film's 30 minutes, 40 minutes, whether or not it's for a brand or whether or not it's for a publisher, I think now, especially when you're talking about factual documentary or even fashion, when something's fantastical and beautiful, it doesn't mean that it doesn't have authenticity. And so when we're talking about cutting things down, it's like, a lot of what we bear in mind at the very beginning is like, how long should this be? Like, and so we, have a lot of a scope as both a producer of content and a broadcaster and a publisher. We're in like quite a privileged position to be able to decide where the content goes and where it lives. But for example, it's like, how will the talent best be used in that particular space? Facebook, usually, like, the numbers are actually huge compared to what they were and what like you'll produce in terms of YouTube now. It's based on a sharing community. The way the algorithm works, where it's completely different. So in those first 3 to 5 seconds, you really need to grab the attention of people who are watching, even if it is just for sort of 5 minutes or so. On that platform, as an example, like, things will be consumed much more quickly. So they're not as, so we make things that are evergreen, but we are increasingly producing content that is just to be consumed on the day over a fixed period. So for December, we released a film every day as a sort of a new ID advent, which was kind of speaking to the talent of the voices that we'd seen over the past year, and for them to project a positive message for 2018. So it's called Be Good, Be Kind, Be 2018. And that was a real challenge, to make a film every single day that we thought stood up to, the quality of content that we're used to making. But one
You
that's
released that
achievable.
over Facebook, right? Every day?
Yeah, so we did that every day over Facebook, and then we did smaller cut downs for Instagram as well. And there was like an Instagram story takeover from a couple of the talent and contributors that we'd used and worked with.
Before we open the floor for questions, I was wondering if every one of you can give like an advice for a brand or a publishing house that wants to really dive into producing video content and making video content that's outstanding.
Yeah, so I'd say, like, know what your message is and know what your tone of voice is. Vice has a really distinct tone of voice. It's opinionated, it's not afraid of controversy, but, and it's also looking to challenge the world that we live in and give a new perspective on that. If we're talking about ideas, the voice of a generation, it's really looking at that cross-section, the intersection of culture, arts, fashion, and as it's moving and progressing, having, a reflection of our identity within that. It's 100% celebratory. And so my advice would be to sort of know who you are as a brand and a message, and then be authentic in terms of aggregating your community around you. So who are the voices, who are the, what are the images that reflect, that voice, and sort of looking at ways to creatively and quite, I guess, tell stories and really get beneath the surface of what it is that you want to talk about.
How would you get beneath the surface? Just if someone would ask you, like, whoa.
Well, for me, what constitutes beneath the surface is when we make films with ID Meets. What we could do is we could do a press junket, and we could talk about what someone's releasing, but we don't. It's like with Rina Sawayama, she talked about being one of the very few sort of artists at the moment who's of like a Southeast Asian sort of origin. If we did Mickey Blanco, what was really authentic to him.
That's the video you're just seeing here.
Film that we do, and that's been amazing because we screened that in the Tate Britain. It's being screened in the Mikado all across the US. So it's been picked up by like sort of arts museums as well as like a cultural piece. But with that, what was really authentic to that was Mickey is a really, really huge like advocate for like the queer community. He wanted to explore colorism. He wanted to explore HIV. There was so much sort of within that story, and getting beneath the surface is looking at the challenges that are faced in that community, but not exploring it from sort of a poverty porn perspective, but really looking at how those people wanted to be seen and how that talent and those artists wanted to be celebrated, and sort of creating something that enabled, you know, us to do that in a really visual and engaging way.
Well, I think if brands want to involve into this storytelling process, I think they have to ask themselves if they are fearless enough to get into the conversation and meet the same standards that editors have to meet when they do their daily work. Otherwise, I think it's not easy to compete and not easy or not strong enough to differ from classical advertising. But there's a big chance for brands if they wanna take the time and get into the conversation with the people.
What do you tell like someone from a brand that is really critical and not really keen on the whole video thing?
Luckily, we have some really fearless clients, so that makes it pretty easy. I don't think storytelling is for everyone, so I wouldn't try to convince a customer to do that, because you have to be honest with yourself and you have to take it really serious. So no convincing in that.
Amazing. And Sylvie?
I feel that, I think that my advice would be that as much as we want to include diversity in everyone's voice and culturally relevant storytelling, brands should also maybe consider to include the underrepresented creatives in the industry. For example, female directors are still underrepresented, people of color, LGBT. There's so many talented filmmakers out there, and I feel it's really important that those people tell the stories in their respective fields as well. Yeah, I think that would be my advice, because the female voice is really no.
That's maybe that's something I totally can agree on. I think the most important thing for brands is go away from the top-down communication and then go where the stories are told. And this is where all these creatives are, and they exactly know how stories can be told.
Yeah, exactly.
Thank you very much.